Rohit Morani. Appreciate everyone joining us today. I'm one of the co-founders of Office Hours. We've helped out many individuals think through next steps in finance, whether it be, of course, undergraduates breaking into banking, private equity, growth equity, staying in banking, of course, kind of like senior rankings and what that looks like. So we've helped out many individuals one-on-one, gone into headhunting as well. Very excited to connect with Polly today. I think the interaction happened quite like serendipitously, where we kind of just got connected, and then of course wanted to learn a little bit more around like background, what that looks like. And she was actually really excited about coming on board to speak more about her experience. And we're always expanding between North America, UK, Europe as a whole. So thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. And thanks so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here. A bit about myself. So I'm Polly Helvacioglu. I'm currently a vice president in investment banking and I work in the corporate finance team. I've been in the industry for just over 6 years now. I joined as an intern and then analyst into the mergers and acquisitions team, and have slowly kind of built my way up and gone through the ranks. And outside of work, I also have a big interest in entrepreneurship. So recently did a Wharton online course in entrepreneurship and then attended the Y Combinator startup school. That was last summer. And off the back of that, I've founded an online content creation platform and go under the guise of Money Mavericks. And the purpose of my content is really to help as many people as I can break into finance and help debunk some of the myths around investment banking, private equity, and anything really related to money and finance.
I love it. And honestly, going through some of the content, I think, Polly, what's really interesting is just kind of like the full candor and taking away some of that like arbitrarily, not like taboo around finance, but definitely just like being a little bit more like open around it and kind of what that looks like. What sort of reception have you gotten over the last like few years doing it? And then also, I guess, twofold question. When you first joined, what has changed kind of in your thought process and mentality to where you are today, banking?
In banking. So I think if I take the last part of the question first, what's changed in banking? I love that question and I have a lot to say about it. So I joined banking back in 2017, so very much pre-COVID era. And the culture was very, very old school. So the hours were relentlessly long. I think in my internship, I was in the office at 8:30, left at like 3 a.m. multiple times a week, was working 7 days a week. And then when I came back as a full-time analyst, again, long hours. But regardless of whether you were busy or not, there was this kind of FaceTime culture. So you had to be at your desk on time. And then sometimes if you're having a quiet day, it was the standard trying to sneak out of the office and leave your coat on the back of your chair. I think post-COVID, and I can only speak to my own experience, but there's definitely been a cultural shift in the industry. And I think that FaceTime has kind of evaporated. And personally, I've seen a lot more efficiency being brought in. You know, now you can connect on Zoom. So even things like analysts staying late to collect, print in and courier them to the head banker's house. Like a lot of this stuff has kind of been taken away. And, you know, me and my team, we're super efficient in what we do. And everyone leaves around 6, 7 p.m. Obviously, often you're logging back in at home, but you're not just there kind of your entire life.
For the sake of being there.
Time.
Yeah. That's awesome. And in general, I guess, overall, even like reception on the social media side of things, because many individuals, you know, I guess like even like a couple of years ago, right? Like I started in finance maybe like almost 10 years ago. It was a little bit more like closed door, right? It was a little bit more like, okay, like what we do here, no one really knows and we don't really speak about it.
Yeah, so I think the reception from my content creation has been super positive, and I've had numerous individuals that have like reached out and messaged me, or I've been doing kind of consulting on the side off the back of it, and they have found it really helpful to help kind of demyth what you need to go into banking and also whether it's the right career for them, because I think along with having the right skill set, it's definitely not for everybody. So I've had very good reception around that. And also it's been really fulfilling to help individuals understand, you know, in what direction they should be going. Because when I went into the industry, so I was reflecting on my journey into banking ahead of this, and was thinking back to kind of how I got to where I did, and I was laughing a bit because I had quite a non-traditional route into finance. So I studied English literature for my undergrad.
Oh,
And
wow.
no one in my family works in finance. So I had no idea about insight weeks or internship. And it got to the final semester of my final year, and suddenly I thought, like, what do I want to do? So I decided, that's when I decided I definitely want to work in mergers and acquisitions. I submitted one job application to Goldman Sachs and was like convinced I
Wow.
was going to get the job. Needless to say, I didn't get an offer first time round. And then from there, had like a 1.5 year journey of doing a master's, starting to apply for all the internships, getting my internship offer. And then that was kind of, my place secured. So yeah, for me, being able to put content out to people that are younger and even people that are 17, 18, so that they're more aware of kind of what you have to do and when, has been really great.
I love it. No, I think that's huge. And honestly, if we speak a little bit more in accordance with that, woman in finance, right?
Yeah.
Has that been like a good, I'm sure, like reception on your end, of course, when it comes to like enabling others that are looking into the space? We've had a couple of our coaches actually write articles, how to succeed as a woman in finance, how to stand out as a woman in finance. How has that changed over the last, call it, like few years?
Yeah, women in finance. I could probably talk about this all day.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic to say the least. But honestly, my experience working in investment banking as a woman has been incredibly positive. So I
Nice.
think that from the moment I joined, I had had a very good reception and had never been aware of like a difference in sex. Maybe it's just me personally, but I work really well with men and I quite like working with them. We have a good relationship. And yeah, it's been a really positive experience. It's an interesting shift as you move up the rank, because I think as you get more senior, there's definitely a decline in a number of women. And part of that, I think, is down to kind of, nature and nurture, and who typically had like care for the children. And actually, again, going back to kind of the post-COVID shift, I think that the flexible or slight flexibility around working now is going to be really positive for women in senior positions. And also, as we kind of filter down to the grad intakes now, I was doing a panel earlier this week actually to interview people that wanted to kind of come in as interns, and there was loads of girls in it. So
That's
I
awesome.
think that over time there's going to be a big balancing of men and women. Definitely in banking. I think the private markets are slightly behind. Personally, I've spoken to lots of private equity funds and they're now looking to expand and diversify, but from my experience, they are still slightly behind.
Right. Do you find that it differs rather kind of between like the US and UK?
Good question. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts around the US? I think in the UK there is a huge diversity push. Yeah, interested to hear what you think in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely like big diversity push as a whole. I would argue that as you get to the buy side and kind of like some of the things that we see there is that teams naturally get smaller. So
Yeah.
from an absolute numbers perspective, like if it's like 100 individuals at a bank, so maybe like, I don't know, like 10, 15%, 20% would be women, I assume, in my thought process. But if it's like all of a sudden like 10 people on a private equity team, sure, like technically the numbers might be similar in the capacity of like percentages, but like those like 2, 3 people out of like 10, all of a sudden, like you just have like, it's more of like an intimate group. So it feels at the end of the day, like you have like more of that balance. But I mean, look, like that being said, I would argue there are firms that are like gender parity. I think Vista Equity Partners, actually, I remember my friend telling me that they're equivalent on that side, men and women.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely very topical, right? And we're moving in a really strong direction across the market, I think.
Totally.
But yeah, it also comes down to personality, right? So, because a lot of my girlfriends didn't want to go into banking. So you have to kind of take that into consideration as well. Like it's quite an intense industry and it's not for everyone. So you can only accommodate those women that want to go into it.
Totally. Yeah. Honestly, we see this on both ends, right? Technically across like all genders. Just the idea that like New York finance tends to be a little bit more like rough and tough versus like in Austin or in LA or even like in San Francisco, more people are open to it because the culture doesn't necessarily permeate through the firm and it ends up being like a little bit more like maybe giving, call it that, for
Yeah.
work-life balance.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that.
Yeah, nice. And then I guess if we go into background a little bit, and happy to, of course, speak according to what you want to speak about on your end. But I think the Y Combinator and I think the Wharton, of course, experience is definitely like super interesting as a whole. If we start with the Wharton and then we'll move on to YCom, how's the Wharton program as a whole?
Yeah, the Wharton program was really good. I think for me, I've always seen businesses from a banking lens up until I did the Wharton online course. And when you look at businesses through a banking lens, you're looking at mature businesses that have been in the industry for a long time. So for me, Wharton was a great opportunity to understand kind of newly founded businesses and more than anything, the theory behind entrepreneurship. So thinking through things like product market fit, testing your products, working out your customer base, running like surveys to understand, what may or may not stick with the consumer, not being trapped into this idea that I as the founder have come up with this concept and I absolutely will kind of see it out, ride or die, even if it's not what the market thinks. And I think in more circumstances than not, most businesses and like successful businesses as well end up pivoting, changing their product and actually launching more than once. So it was just a great kind of intro to me to learn kind of, the theory and basics behind entrepreneurship. And then if I then move on to YC, I think YC was like one step further. And that was like the practicalities of how to actually how to actually play out the concepts that I learned about from Wharton. And that was where it was around how to actually fundraise, go in and setting up coffee chats and speaking to people and seeing if they like your idea and whether actually your business idea is fit for fundraising. I think there's two branches of entrepreneurship. I think you've got high growth tech businesses that you want to scale super fast, but then you've also got entrepreneurship where it's like more of a, I guess, personal brand that develops over a longer period of time and you're like bootstrapping along the way and then almost pushing out products to the community that you build. So yeah, both were really, really exciting and I learned a lot. And then I think I reflected after, doing both of the courses.
Which one would you argue has Wharton been more helpful on the finance banking side of things? YC more for Money Mavericks? Or what does that look like?
I think YC was the better of the two, just because it was more engaging. And actually the way that it's run is that because it is an official program, you were doing it as a cohort. So there was also an opportunity to find a co-founder. So some people were there to find their co-founder and then went on to launch their business and then applied to the YC the following year. So I found the YC just more interactive, and it was also super cool to talk to people that were building businesses and understand and leverage from their experience. So I remember talking to one guy that was like super tech focused, and he was sending me all these websites where I could like learn to either code or use simple code to build a website. So yeah, I think that would be my favorite of the two.
That's awesome. No, I mean, we've heard like great things, of course. So used to live in the Bay Area, rather close, and it was in Palo Alto, rather close to YC as a whole. I know that there's like kind of like, not like altering views when it comes to that like 7% for like 120K mentality and kind of like taking on equity from them. Or excuse me, giving up equity, taking on cash from them and what that looks like from an investment perspective. And you brought up a really good point, kind of that like high growth versus like, to be fair, cash flowing businesses. How do you think about that in general when it comes to the banking lens and then of course now the operating lens?
Yes, I think from the operating lens, it was quite insightful for me because at one point in time, I thought I'm just going to put everything into kind of, entrepreneurship and launch a business and apply to YC and all these places. But as you correctly said, number one, you're giving away so much on day one and you ultimately lose control. So I think as an operator, my key takeaways was that actually I would rather take things more slowly, bootstrap, and also just based on me as a person, I think I'm more suited to building out a personal brand and like relating to people online and then building the business from there, as opposed to kind of high growth scale tech business. Arguably, yes, you may be the CEO, but are people going to actually know or care about you? Or is it all just about the product? And then I think from the banking lens, I think it's always interesting to assess these more mature businesses from a fresh perspective and think around, sometimes it's about advising big businesses like Coca-Cola, for example, and that is just an example, not one of my clients, on how they can become more innovative, what kind of acquisitions they may be looking to make next, so that they can continue to grow in line with, these high growth startups.
Awesome. No, I think it's definitely, correct me if I'm wrong, right? When we're working roles kind of responsible for larger companies, whether we advising, whether we investing into, I even remember at Battery, it used to be a little bit more like, okay, like $5 million business and call me when it's 10 type of mentality, right? Because it's like, hey, look, like it's not like recurring enough for us. The margins aren't there. Give us an understanding and like come back and let's like have another conversation maybe in like a year or so. But the reality is like even getting to like $5 million run rate is like really, really difficult when you're starting at zero. So I think it ends up being on both ends where you see that coming from the advisory growth equity investing side of things more to the operating side. You just appreciate, I feel like, the entrepreneur a lot more.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think as a banker, or as you say, like even as like a private equity investor, you don't have that appreciation. It's all about the numbers, well, I guess as a PE investor, you may be looking for a business that has been underperforming and you can buy kind of for a discount. But yeah, there's not that appreciation for the entrepreneur, and also it's sometimes a lack of the personal connection on the founder level.
Totally. The advice, or I guess if we get into a little bit of advice that you would give to anyone joining banking today, a junior, what that looks like.
I think I've got two pieces of advice. So the first would be know your why. When you're going into a job like banking, I think it's super important to understand like why you want to go into investment banking. Often the reasons may not be the reasons that you think they are at the start. So like psychologically, a lot of people that go into it are either overachievers, or sometimes they can be driven from like a place of insecurity and they're trying to prove something to the world, which was actually like me when I went into it, and that's completely fine. But the sooner you can work that out, the more kind of advantageous it will be. And the second piece of advice is something I've spoken about on my TikTok channel, and it's do your research, because day one, like you're applying to investment banking and everyone wants to go into mergers and acquisitions, or usually mergers and acquisitions, or maybe leverage finance. Both are great teams, and I really learned a lot in my time in M&A. But there are a whole bunch of other teams out there that are also super cool. Like you've got like debt syndication, equity syndication, ESG financing. They're still all like front office jobs. You're gonna earn largely in line, but yeah, they offer something different. Some of them have a better work-life balance. So yeah, I think do your research and know why you're doing it. My two pieces of advice.
Totally. And I guess if you flip the script a little bit, coming from the analyst associate VP days, what do you look for in a good analyst today, or a good intern?
Yeah, I personally think that above technical kind of capability or having a great CV, for me, it's about attitude and that kind of internal determination to succeed, because you can teach all the technical skills. And like certainly when I joined, I didn't really have the technical backing. Like I'd done a master's in finance, but a lot of it was theoretical. So I'd never built full-blown models or been doing kind of like pitch deck, and you learn it all on the job. Like a lot of people that get into the analyst roles have these great CVs, but if you're lacking like a good attitude and a determination to succeed, then I don't think that you'll make the best analyst or associate.
No, I mean, I think that definitely makes sense. I think the preparation is a big part of it. I think these days more than anything, it's kind of like the hustle and hunger. I feel like, to be fair, like obviously, or we hear this a lot, right? It's a little bit more like templated, where it's like, oh, like someone hungry. What does that really mean? Even right now, currently, like within office hours, within my family business, like proactiveness. And again, it's one of those things where it's really difficult to kind of like emulate until you get there. Having a VP almost like breathing over my shoulder back in the day basically taught me how to get there and how to think like that and how to take things like off of their plate if possible and make their lives easier, which doesn't necessarily happen overnight. But as you look back to your journey, kind of like the analyst associate VP side of things, was it so much, and tell me what you can speak to, was it so much kind of like political climate? Was it so much like, hey, like right place, right time? Was it so much like, hey, look, like I like was like heads down, really working hard? The BD aspect kicks in later as you engage with more businesses. Like, what did that all look like? And do you think that people can do it today in that like short amount of time too?
Yeah, so I think when I think of my journey and kind of the progression up, it was probably a combination of two things. So first and foremost, you have got to have that hunger and you've got to work really, really hard. So the first few years that I was in the job, or at least the first couple of years, I really did like prioritize my job over everything else. Like it came first and foremost, and I sacrificed a lot. Like all of my friends that went into other types of roles would be out in the week having fun and socializing, and I was like in the office working, and I was completely fine with that. But you do have to do that. Like there's no way around it. You're going to be working long hours. And the second thing that I think super important and helps people like stand out from day one actually, and then more as you climb up the ladder, is having good EQ. So being able to connect with people on like a personal level and being likable and having some charm around you. So you've got to get your networking in, you know, organizing those coffees with the VPs and associates and even MDs that you're working with and in other teams, and diversifying the people that you work with, so that when it comes to like panels at the end of the year, you've not just worked with one person all year.
Mm-hmm. So then you're subjects to that individual, and then of course like how they think about you and everything of the sort, right?
Yeah. And it's this whole thing around like invisible personal branding, right? I remember I was reading the founder of ClassPass's book, and she talks around where yeah, exactly. And she talks around when she decided that she wanted to kind of build this business, and she sent an email around to her consulting firm at the time and said that she like, thanks so much for the experience. I'm going on to build this business. And I think the CEO or one of her senior directors called her up to his office and said, look, I'd like to invest in you. And she was kind of taken aback. Yeah, she was kind of taken aback. And then, you know, it just talks to how important your personal brand is, which everything you do is going to feed it into the way that people perceive you.
Because a lot of times we think that our firm defines who we are, right? Where it's like, okay, if I have this domain, then I have this email, then I have this role, then I have this office and where I work, and that's kind of everything, especially when work is everything for you and everything is work, then you just start like thinking like that. What happens then all of a sudden if you're either laid off in situations like today, where many people are, unfortunately, or you just want to do something else, right? Like you're not necessarily kind of tethered to this desk. What sort of advice do you give on that front, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a hard one, because I think your title, your job, your company can totally become your brand, especially if it's your brand, it's your ego, and it can carry you through, especially when you're more junior, right? I think that my advice would be to people that are either feel they could be in that position or don't want to get into that position, that you do need to take the time to kind of do the self-development work outside of your role, to understand like what you offer and also what you want, so that if you were ever to get laid off, you have confidence in yourself and your skill set, and realize that you are more than just the bank or institution that you work for. And sometimes as well, confidence can come from speaking to other companies, or even doing things like this, like, putting yourself out there, putting yourself outside your comfort zone, for sure.
No, I like that. I think that makes total sense. But you got a question from the audience. Can you give some advice for people working in different areas that are looking for ways to enter into IB?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So when you say different areas, I'm going to assume that you're within finance. If you're not, then follow up with another question. But I think if you're within finance and you're looking for ways to enter into IB, it is a very well-trodden path. Like a lot of bankers started out as accountants or came from like an audit background. And I think it's a case of just being persistent and firing out your applications, getting as much deal experience as you can in the firm you're in. And yeah, just putting your net out wide and really spending the time educating yourself on the division that you want to join. So if that's mergers and acquisitions, you need to be reading around the deals. You should understand like how to do the job before you get to the job, so that when you get to the interview, you kind of stand out as someone that clearly is super invested and wants to make that move.
That makes sense. And then sake of discussion, if it's an individual not in finance today, but they a little bit late bloomer, think that, okay, finance is now interesting for me, I want to break in, but it's like maybe they're already doing something else.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, there's always the option of like doing further studying, right? So you can do a master's or an MBA, which is probably going to be the best route for that individual to get in. I ended up doing a master's in finance to help bridge the gap between doing my English literature undergrad degree. So that would be my first piece of advice. And I would say alongside doing that, you want to be getting your applications into like Insight Weeks and internship. But you can always pivot in your career. I do truly believe that anything is possible if you put your mind to it. I've always kind of had that mindset, like anything that I want, I will get.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think you have to see the world like that. And yeah, there's always a way in.
Totally. I mean, it's at the end of the day, the only way you kind of know how, or in my mind, the only way that you should know how, because it's like, look, like if that isn't kind of like how you think about it, then someone else will kind of like step in and probably kind of eat your cake type of situation.
Yeah, no, 100%. And also, look, these days with kind of social media, there's so much information out there. Like, I think you could teach yourself anything online with YouTube, TikTok. There's actually probably too much information, which sometimes can be a bit overwhelming, I have to say, but there's so much out there. So yeah, it's putting in the time and believing in yourself.
100%. So I guess in interest of time as a whole, only because at the end of the day, would love to learn a little bit more since you're seeing it day to day. Can we discuss a little bit more around the market?
The market, yeah. So it's been a volatile year or two, to say the least. The M&A market at the moment is still moving relatively slowly, but I think deal activity is picking back up. And then in the actual kind of the high yield sponsor space, I'd say the last like 6 months or so, the sponsors have been quite inactive just because it's been too expensive for them to kind of issue debt, and like a lot of the returns haven't worked. But in the last month, there's been a huge pickup in activity. So I'm working on quite a lot at the moment in the high yield space where sponsors are looking to, actually a lot of it is refinancing. So they've got upcoming refinancings and also like A&Es. So there's a lot of that. And there's also a few big deals out there that have been floating around for a while that are looking to now kick off with the hope to kind of close next year, with hoping that markets kind of have peaked, at least in the UK, and interest rates are going to start to come down.
Yep. It's good that you are calling kind of the UK thinks about it that way. I'm not sure really what's going on in the US to a certain degree, because I think a lot of what we hear is that it's going to get a little worse than before it gets better.
Really?
But I think it's wavering kind of thoughts on both ends. But all I remember is that one of my friends who's a VP at a more of like a bulge bracket out here was basically like, now we expect like 2025, because everyone was like, oh, like 2024 will be better. The closer and closer we get to 2024, all of a sudden it's like, okay, it might be 2025.
Yeah, I think to get back to like the deal activities that we had, say second half of 21, it's going to be 2025, but things are definitely starting to pick up a bit. And also I have to mention, you know, the Middle East is an absolute hub at the moment. There is a lot going on there. I've spent a lot of time working with clients out in kind of Saudi and the whole region. So there's enough activity there from an EMEA perspective to kind of account for the drop that we're seeing in some of the other more developed markets.
Totally. In the last week, though, I feel like we go almost from like one global crisis in like Asia to another one in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how that kind of infiltrates into the finance markets, but it's certainly not good.
Any advice for individuals that may have gone laid off recently, Polly? Because we do get that question quite a bit, where it's like, hey, like, how do I like formulate the story? How do I like position?
Yeah, good question. I think you're going to have to, first and foremost, there will be an opportunity come up. It probably feels like the worst thing in the moment, but you've got to remain confident in yourself and your ability. If it's a case of, maybe also it's a case of taking the time to reflect on what you do want to do next. If you do want to go back into the same job, or if it's a chance for you to kind of pivot into something else. If you're looking to kind of pivot into something else, you could be learning new skills, you could be doing online courses, you could try your hand at entrepreneurship. If you're hoping to go back into like banking or finance, then it's just about crafting a good story around what exactly happened. So, for example, in the UK, we had like the Credit Suisse collapse. So there was a whole kind of bank of individuals that lost their jobs, and a lot of those are now popping up at other names across the street. So there are jobs out there, but I do appreciate that it's a tough job market at the moment.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it kind of comes back to like those basics around pushing volume, getting in touch with different individuals, thinking through, okay, if an opportunity does come up, all of a sudden I was the last person that Polly had conversations with or that Polly had coffee with. So all of a sudden it's like kind of staying top of mind and consistently following up.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right as well. Like you have got to you push yourself out there, right? Speak to as many recruiters as you can, also email companies that aren't actively hiring, because you never know. I think you can just email around every single finance company that you're interested in, and if one of them likes your CV, then even if it's just a coffee chat for now, that could lead to something down the line.
Totally. I think we have maybe one last question here, and then of course anything you want to discuss on your end. Two misconceptions. Can you give two misconceptions around investment banking? The industry can be very challenging to get in from the outside.
Two misconceptions. I think the first misconception is that it's glamorous. Everyone, I don't know about you, but a lot of people kind of watch American Psycho and all of these Wolf of Wall Street, the glamorized films on finance and investment banking, and it isn't a glamorous industry day to day. It's definitely roll your sleeves up and get to work. And even if you're kind of traveling, again, sometimes social media can make things look glamorous. I'm on a business class flight to New York, but probably been up late the night before finishing off your pitch book and probably not had much sleep. So I think that's my first misconception. And then the second one would be maybe around what it actually takes to succeed. So I'd say that the standard thoughts around what an investment banker are, or what it takes to be an investment banker, probably aren't true. So I do actually think that being personable and having empathy and having a good strong personality is super, super important. You don't have to be aggressive, almost on the spectrum of a psychopath, which is what American Psycho depicts, to be good. It's a people's business. You want to be developing relationships with your clients so that they call you when something comes up. So that would be my second misconception.
Yeah. I think also at the same time, target, non-target, it's arguably, and I'm not going to say easy to break into or not easy to break into, but I think at the end of the day, there's so many resources out there, to be fair.
Yeah.
And that itself will allow you, because if you really want to put in the work, I think that allows you to really get pretty darn far with the work itself, that the work that you can do from home with the computer, with the laptop, with your phone, that wasn't available 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's arguably too much content out there to keep up with. So I think that ends up being kind of a misconception where it's okay, because we'll hear this quite a bit, very difficult to break into, no one went to my school, I went to a non-target, but it's okay, the 5 people that did end up in finance from your school, have you tried to become best friends with them? And they're oh no, not yet. Why not? Right?
Yeah.
Kind of work with the resources. And to be fair, maybe my last point will be no one has it perfect, right? The Harvard, Yale, Wharton individual, where all of a sudden you think that it's kind of a direct path to call it MBB, call it a bulge bracket, call it a mega fund. It's not like that, because they know for a fact that all of a sudden there's just so much competition no matter where you come from. So if no one really has it cut out from them from the onset, it's a battle for everyone to a certain degree. Sure, some people might have different resources, but to be fair, a battle is a battle. So do what you can, right?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I think that's such a good point, that you can't, even if you don't go to an on-target school, the fact that you've almost classified yourself as that is a negative. Everyone is equal. Yes, it might be slightly harder for your CV to get through that first round, but if you put in enough effort and you apply to enough places, all you really need to do is secure one interview, and then that's your chance to shine. So the more work you can do in the background, the better off you're going to be. And just to go back to what I said before, I think if you really do put your mind to something, then it's only on you to not succeed and achieve what you want.
100%. Did you want to end with a note around Money Mavericks and others to kind of catch up and watch it?
Yeah, sure. So a note around Money Mavericks. So on TikTok, you can find me under Money Maverick, and the content that I'm creating is really pushed at people that are trying to break into finance, and it's also there to kind of help debunk some of the myths around finance. I try to be as honest and relatable as possible, and I don't glamorize the job in all of my content, and I talk to kind of what it takes to succeed, what you can expect to do in the job. And please go check it out, and keep updated with me. And thanks so much for tuning in today.
Of course. Thank you so much. I was watching the £1 million house, how to afford your dream home. Which I think is super interesting, because we don't really speak about that. And we've done even some analysis on how much you should have in savings and stuff like that, because everyone talks about how much they make. They don't talk about how much they take home.
Yeah, that's a good one. I speak to that as well. I think the psychology around money and understanding how to manage your money. And I talked to kind of some of the mistakes I made when I was younger, longer is also very much covered on the channel. And hopefully it will give you all some inspiration, and if you can all learn one thing from it, I'd love it.
Cool. Thank you so much, Polly. This was great. And then definitely let me know. I'll let you know when I'm in London. If you're ever in New York and in the States, we'll love to connect in person.
No, 100%.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks
and then
so much.
I'll share the short form and kind of like the YouTube and stuff thereafter. We can share it.
Perfect. Thanks. And hopefully I'll speak to you
Thank
soon.
you. Take care.
Bye.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.